Today, we're going to be discussing how to grow your own food, even if you have little space or experience. And as someone who's not a gardener, and I've killed many plants in my life, I myself really need to learn this. And some people have asked me, like, why are we doing this now, like at the start of winter? But as it turns out, Wendy has explained to me that it is a really good time for you to plan your spring garden. So let's do it. And when she came to me with this topic, I was just really excited to learn because I love to learn, and I know you guys do too. So let me introduce Wendy to you. Wendy S. Delmater is the author of the newly released book, Grow Your Own Food, and has been a kitchen gardener for 55 years. She ran SC Grow Food at Home, LLC, which helped homeowners maximize their food growing space using edible landscaping. On only 1/3 of a suburban acre, she's sold excess produce to a health food store and other clients. She is passionate about gardening for health, self-sufficiency, and exercise. So, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us to share your expertise. I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay, hello. Um, I don't know what time it is where everybody else is, but we just had dinner and it's a really good time for an after dinner chat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you some of the material, not all of it, of course, it's in my book. Uh, One the main reasons that you should grow your own food aren't just because it tastes better, and it does, it really does. It's because you get sun and exercise, you spend time in those great outdoors. But get this, you'll actually meet a lot of your neighbors. And if you live in a suburban area, it's really hard to meet the people that live nearby. So this is a useful thing. You also can control the amount of pesticides or weed killers that go into your food, if any. And you really can't do that when you buy things in the store. And by the way, if they say that it's organic, there's something called greenwashing. It's kind of like whitewashing. They're saying that it's green and it really isn't. You do have to wonder because they get a lot more money for organic food. And I've heard things about them not really being as organic as they say they are. They're organic for the inspectors and spray after they leave. So, also, food security. As supply chains become unreliable, a kitchen garden, patio garden, or indoor hydroponics setup will add fresh and local things for you to eat. Last but not least, if you do this correctly, you'll save money. I don't want you growing $5 worth of tomatoes for $60 worth of materials. That's not cost effective. Instead, I want you to learn to save your seeds whenever possible. Learn to make your own compost and even make your own fertilizer and bug repellents. It's not that hard. It just sounds hard because you've never tried it before. So, gardening where I live in South Carolina, and I was originally from New York, Long Island, pretty close to Jones Beach, different climate. Right now, I'm in a climate that has year around weeds. I mean, in Chicago, where you are, it's just, you have winter and everything dies and then comes back in the spring. Here, the weeds never stop and the insects never quite all go away. It's pretty awful. But maybe you live in Alaska or South Florida, the mountains of Colorado, deserts of New Mexico, Arizona, Australia. The fact is, gardening anywhere can be a challenge. I'm not going to promise you you won't have learning experiences if you're new at this, but if you try, you'll be on the road to better food security and no longer importing all of your produce from someplace far away. In my case, we get a lot of our vegetables from, thank goodness, Florida, but most of the vegetables in the United States come from California. You ever hear of the 3,000-mile salad? And some things come from Peru because they're flown up here. Your carbon footprint will be greatly reduced by growing your own food. I'm not saying you can grow everything you need, but you can certainly supplement what you buy at the grocery store with inexpensive and delicious things you grow yourself. And once you get a kitchen garden established, I've found that it only takes less than an hour a day on average to keep it going. So the first thing we're going to talk about is the types of garden. This is what some people think of when they think garden. And that's not necessarily what your garden is going to look like. Instead, what your garden may look like is something like, oh, this. This is a square foot garden. Notice how everything is in boxes, that helps you space your plants properly. It's one of the earliest things that people do when they start gardening. You can put this on top of your patio, on the grass. You can do it out on a um, ledge, an outdoor patio from your apartment building or on a roof. It really is one of the easiest things to do, and it can be done in many different um, locations. There's some more square foot garden boxes. Notice one of them is raised in a little pyramid, and that's for strawberries.
Wendy, if you click on it and make it bigger, is it going to screw everything up?
Yep,
Oh, okay. All
but
right.
this one's bigger. So there you go. There's one that's done with railroad ties. And there's one on top of somebody's patio in their backyard. Now, what you can do if it's out in the yard is you can put some hardware cloth on the bottom of it. That's steel, and it basically keeps moles and voles and things from uh, going underneath your vegetables and eating up. But you don't have to do that. When you're first starting, that's still a fun thing to do. All right, so let's talk about types of gardens. Those are not the only types. If you have land that is, oh, say, sloped in some way, you can use something called, uh, there we go, terrace garden. Isn't that beautiful? And a terrace garden just means that you have the water going from the top to the bottom of the hill, and it stops for a while in each one of these things, and it keeps the water from running off down that hill. Another type of garden that you might consider would be a raised bed. This is one of mine, by the way. What you do with this is there's a hill behind it, and the water goes down that hill. This bed is actually at the height where I can sit on it when I'm working, and it really makes a difference. It's lined with tar paper on the inside, so the water stops there. And also the creosote that's on the ties doesn't get on my food, so it's kind of cool that way. Last but not least, I would like to point out that you can do something even easier than that. But of course, I'm trying not to break your budget, but you can buy things like this on Amazon or wherever and grow quite a bit in a small space. Now, getting back to my notes here, there's something called lasagna gardening. Lasagna gardening, I'm going to stop sharing for a moment so we can talk about this. Lasagna gardening is where you put some cardboard out on top of the lawn or the weeds or just the bare grass, bare dirt. And on top of that, you pour some topsoil, you pour some compost, and you put your seeds in that. And the cardboard will kill any grass underneath it, and it will eventually rot and become part of the compost. And you can start a garden with very little work right away by doing lasagna gardening. It's also something that you find people doing in a large way. I know somebody that did lasagna gardening for their entire backyard. They just wanted rid of the entire lawn, and they had the dirt brought in with a dump truck. But I'm not that, shall we say, ambitious. Then there's something called French double dig, and I'm going to show you the diagram for that. Okay, back to screen share. And French double dig is a diagram that I'm going to come up with for you. This is all alphabetical, so it shouldn't be too hard, except it's behind somebody. I'm going to minimize where I'm looking at everybody else. Okay, there we go. French double dig is basically a very labor intensive sort of thing. You start by taking out the dirt and put it at the end of where you want to work. And then you take the dirt from the next part and put it on the previous one until you get the whole way across. What this does is it loosens up the soil, and it's a great way to get started if you have the room to do such a thing. Another thing that you might want to consider is the type of soil you have. We have very hard clay under a little bit of sand, and so French double dig didn't work for us. We actually had to rent a mechanical auger just to put in fence posts. The ground is so hard here. So that's why we went with raised beds and with terraces where the water would come off of a hill into that. Now, the next type of garden I'd like to talk about is something called Back to Eden gardening. And this is a free movie you can watch on YouTube. And I'm going to show you just what the opening screen looks like. It is a, let's see, Back to Eden would be under me. There you go. Back to Eden is about an hour and 40 minutes. And an hour and 40 minutes of absolute gardening fascination for me, at least. This guy moved to the east side of the Cascade Mountains. Everything was green, so he figured he could do farming there like he used to do in California. And it turns out that the rain hits the mountains and doesn't get to the other side. And the place got so little rain, he was struggling. And he wondered why the forests were so green, even though his garden was struggling. And he looked at it very carefully and noticed that there was this deep layer of rotted leaves and rotted bark chips and rotted wood, and it was holding the moisture in. And so he tried that on his farm. He shows you in this movie about an orchard that he hasn't had to water in 30 years. Huge apples on it. He has almost no problem with weeds. When they do show up, you can just pull them out because the soil is so loose. He doesn't have to hill his potatoes because the soil is so loose, the potatoes go down into the soil. And this is something that we're trying to do. We got a chipper shredder so that we can do that. And here's, if you're taking notes, something you might find very interesting. It's called chip drop. If you're in the United States, your local tree surgeon, your arborist, is looking for places to get rid of the wood chips. And if you have a place he can put them, you can put yourself on a list for that and for lumber if you want to put it into your fireplace, and they will drop it off for free. So just look up chip drop online. Okay, chip drop is free. We can't do it because there's only one place they could dump it, and it would block all 3 of our vehicles. And my husband's always on call. But we got something where we could make our own because we were really, really, really impressed with Back to Eden gardening. And there's also something called rain gardenings. I showed you a terrace and I showed you an elaborate terrace garden. But rain gardens are something much simpler. It's just, this is where the water tends to pool. You make a depression. And if you're going to put your plants, put them there. If you have, say, a blueberry bush, rather than put it on the top of a hill, put it at the bottom where the water is automatically going to go. You work with what you have, or you hollow something out and put it in there. There's also an interesting form of gardening called hugelkultur. And this is kind of like a miniature version of Back to Eden, where you make a big mound. And in Maryland, if you're far enough inland, if you're in Annapolis, you're on the coast. But this is if you have really cold weather. Hugelkultur doesn't just make nice soil, it makes heat. And so it extends your growing season. You can look that up online, or if you're interested, I'll show you information. So I'll send you information. Now, the one that you talked about earlier was the edible landscaping. Does anybody have any idea what you can use in edible landscaping? I'm looking for people to make suggestions. What could you plant in your yard that is edible and yet would look like landscaping?
Maybe some herbs?
Herbs would be good. Some flowers are edible too.
Right.
Pansies, mums, snapdragons, and depending on your climate, certain orchids are actually, they're edible. So that's quite nice. But I was thinking more along the line of landscaping shrubs like blueberries, landscaping trees.
I was wanted to tell you that Victoria says we have passion fruit using it as our fence covering, and the school kids love it.
Oh yes, one of my neighbors does that as well. One of my neighbors does that too. You've got to be careful though, because it makes so much shade that anything behind it's not going to grow very well. But passion fruit is great on a fence. You can also train trees, if you have very little space, to grow on the side of your house or a shed. It's called espalier, and it means laddered. And you have to protect the house so the roots don't damage the foundation. But I actually have a lovely picture of a nice smelling pear tree from the Cloisters Museum in New York City that I would absolutely love to share with everybody. It's such a pretty picture. So we'll go there. Look at this. Isn't that gorgeous? This is a pear tree. You can see it's bearing fruit, and it's been trained that way from when it was young. And it's now a landscape element. It's not just something edible, which is pretty darn cool, if you ask me. I particularly happen to like something called an Arctic kiwi. Arctic kiwi is something that doesn't make the fuzzy kiwi fruit that you would normally get in the supermarket if they carry it. It makes little fruits, maybe the size of the end of my thumb, that have soft, shiny skin like a cherry that's edible. And you may get as much as 100 pounds of fruit from this vine, which it comes in a variegated white, pink, and green, and can go up the front of your house or the side of your house and look like landscaping. And we're planning on getting that to shade our front porch because it's just beautiful, just absolutely beautiful. Flowers too, so very nice. All right, so going back to other edible landscaping things, you might want to consider doing something on you might want to consider doing something on a trellis. I'm sure you've seen grape trellises, and they can be an absolutely beautiful thing to do with your yard. They're also almost maintenance free. And I can show you a picture of mine if you're interested. The main thing you need to do is find out what kind of grapes will grow in your area and then trim them once a year and pick the fruit when it shows up. It's not that hard. You can get clumping bamboo. They have come up with that. It will not take over your house, your yard, and your neighborhood. Clumping bamboo stays where you plant it, and yet you get gardening stakes and bamboo shoots out of this, which is pretty darn awesome. Another thing that you can do with your edible landscaping would be container gardening. Okay. Now, I have some absolutely wonderful container gardening suggestions in the book, and I'll just bring up a few of them for you because I know that you would enjoy these very much. Container gardening, I have so many things here. Here we go. There's blueberries. Now, understand that you don't just get the fruit. In the autumn, the blueberry leaves turn a beautiful red, which is really, really nice. This is containers on my front steps. Those are edible pansies, and those are my tomato starts back there. And by the way, the container in the back, the ceramic one, is a 4-year-old cayenne pepper plant. We bring it in and put it under a grow light every year, and it's just so much fun. So this is a Meyer lemon tree. It gets a pretty pot because I bring it indoors. And these are not pretty pots. These are our tomatoes. We noticed that all of our neighbors were doing tomatoes in containers. And we tried it without that, and they would have all sorts of diseases and die. But if you put them in the container for some reason, they take right off. So those are 5-gallon buckets. Now you can very often get free 5-gallon buckets from, bakeries and places like that. But these are paint buckets. They're from the paint department. You don't want colored plastic because it may have harmful dyes. If you're going to do this, you want the white ones. And we'll get to ground covers in a little while. Stop sharing. Let's go back to the content. Next thing I want to talk about is forest gardening. I don't have any pictures of that, but forest gardening is if you have a wooded area, you can introduce things to the wooded area that will not only feed you, but feed the wildlife. And if you like watching the deer and the birds, etc., it's a lot of fun. We put a chestnut tree in the woods behind our house. We're putting in some wild plums and things like that. We don't own the land, and if they decide to develop it, they'll cut these down. But until they do, it's a wonderful and inexpensive way to do things. And the last one I'm going to mention is something called hydroponics. You may have heard of hydroponics, but I don't know if you've ever seen it done. And it's done commercially. It's really, really interesting the way they do it commercially, but they also do it in various ways at home. So let's go down to the hydroponics. This is an industrial hydroponics setup where they're doing, I believe those are beet greens. This is a tomato tree. All that above this area is one tomato plant. Tomatoes don't die until they either get taken down by disease or taken down by the cold. So this one is several years old and it's at Epcot Center. They have a hydroponics ride. You see the people on the little tram ride behind us. Hydroponics does not use any dirt. Those strawberries you get in the supermarket are usually grown hydroponically. They use a nutrient solution, they use water, and they just keep the water moving and it grows roots into the water. But you can do hydroponics at home. There's something called a grow tower that you can close this. I don't know why I'm seeing Bonnie only, but I am. Hello, Bonnie.
Bonnie just joined us and she's not on camera yet, but there's everybody's here. So
Okay, that's good. I'm just not seeing the whole screen. Exit minimized video. There we go. Very good. I've never done a workshop on Zoom. I've done them in other ways. So this is a little new to me. Sorry about that. So the hydroponics that you can do at home there's something called a grow tower, and a grow tower is something that you can bring in the winter, put out on the patio, on the ledge if you happen to be an apartment dweller. It's something that doesn't take much space. You put grow lights on it when it's indoors. And again, it uses a nutrient solution. It's not that expensive. You get a ridiculous amount of food from a very small area of space. You can also do something called sprouting, where you put trays of a little bit of dirt, sprouts on it, and then put another tray on it after it's moist, and you just put those under a grow light. You can literally have food in maybe 2 weeks that way. And we're not just talking bean sprouts. You can sprout all kinds of things from sunflower seeds to beet greens to broccoli. And it's really, really delicious and easy to do. It does have a setup cost, but once you do it, you're going to not have to go out for salads anymore. You'll have more than you know what to do with. Now, the next main topic we're going to talk about is preparing the ground and planting your garden. And again, this is December. It's the right time to order your seeds and decide where you're going to plant what and how. You've been thinking, I hope, after what you have that you can work with as far as land or outdoor spaces, or even a windowsill. Now let's talk about, do you need all that lawn? Now, for those of us in America, and most of the world really, most of Americans used to be farmers, much of the world still is, or at least they were gardeners. Even 100 years ago, 90% of Americans were farmers. Before we delegated, that is, our food to factory farms. And I think we should take that power back. Beautiful or not, do we really need all of those lawns? I think we should plant something beautiful and practical like a garden. Now, if you're dealing with an HOA, that might be a problem, which is why I talked about edible landscaping, but they can't tell you what to put in your backyard. So you still have hope. Now, if you're in the United States, I don't know what the equivalent, Victoria, would be in Australia, but what USDA growing zone are you in? Do you know your climate? Do you know what will grow in your area? I actually have a grow zone map that I had brought up earlier, and I'll see if I can find it. Grow zone map. Here it is. Very good. I'm going to share this. Okay, good. This is a marvelous map, and it gives you in a very quick graphic an idea of where in the United States you live. I live right about here, and I used to live up there, so there's a bit of a difference. But there are huge differences from all the way down here to there in what you can grow. And Alaska's even a lighter color. It's pretty cold. Your growing season is also important. I'm going to close this. And it depends on when your first and last frost dates are. And that's something that you can find out by going to the uh, Old Farmer's Almanac site, and they will tell you what your first and last frost dates are and when you should plant things if you just type in um, your zip code in the United States or your address. And again, this is for Americans, but I'm pretty sure you'll have something similar to your next resource, and that's the local agricultural exchange. About 80 years ago, the federal government, maybe earlier than that, set up in one of each of the states in the United States a college that would disseminate agricultural information to farmers and to home gardeners. And so your cooperative extension, when I was in New York, it was Cornell University. In South Carolina, it's Clemson, can help you know which things are best adapted to your climate, when your first and last frost dates are. They are so incredibly helpful. So that's a resource, and I'm going to give you the actual link, if you wish, at the end of this, to where you can get that information about your cooperative extensions. Another thing that cooperative extension does is it tests your soil. So let's talk about soil for a minute. You need to know what kind of soil you have. It's www.almanac.com/cooperative extension services, cooperative-extension-services. I'll mention that again later on if you need to hear it. But the main thing you need to know is, do you need fertilizers? And if so, how much? And what's the pH of your soil? That's something that your cooperative extension lab cannot tell you. I don't know what it's like in Australia or other parts of the world, but in the United States, it's very inexpensive because it's basically funded by your tax dollars. I get an analysis of my soil just like I was a farmer for $6. And they can't tell the pH because that's something that's more of a moment in time. You use litmus paper. I mean, there are so many things gardener supplies will try to sell you. One of them is a sensor to check your pH, and you have to calibrate it each time. Just use litmus paper because it's just not worth it to do that. I've even used a pool test kit. The main thing is you want to, with most vegetables, get the pH somewhere between 7 and 7.5. That affects how it picks up all the nutrients from your soil. Now, next thing let's talk about is planting your garden. I do mine on a piece of paper. All right. And I have basically written out, and it's not even to scale, just a rough map of my growing spaces. And then I number them. And on each page after that, I put the number and say, here I'm going to grow this, this, and this. And then I set aside my seeds. It's not hard. But what you want to do if you've never done that before is try an app called, let's see, there it is. It's called GrowVeg, GrowVeg. GrowVeg is not like most of the things you'll find if you go looking online for a garden planning app. Most of them are either for commercial landscape people or for people that are trying to landscape their homes. Most of them are really expensive. GrowVeg is free and it does a pretty good job. Next, let's talk about the tools you're going to need. And if you want me to put this in the comments later on, I will. But the first thing you're going to need is a sturdy hand trowel. How sturdy? Do you see what shape this one's in after I've been working with it for a couple of years? It's exercise, okay? I mean, it's seen some work, but you want a sturdy one. You don't want a plastic one. That would be terrible. The other thing that just fell on the floor is something called a hand rake. And a hand rake is really, really good for getting rid of the weeds in between things. By the way, I have a red ribbon on the end of it because it's the same color as the garden. And I go, I can't find my hand rake. I can't find my trowel. And I'll see the red ribbon and I'll write where it is. So that's just a little fun thing. Okay, other tools that you will need while you're out there are going to be a sturdy shovel. And I recommend both the pointed one, the spade shovel, and the square one because they're used for different things, but at least a pointed one. I recommend if you're going to do a compost pile, a pitchfork to turn it. And of course, the usual suburban things like a rake for leaves and a steel tine garden rake is good for getting the soil ready to plant things. Another thing I find extremely useful is called a hand pruner. And that's just to snip small things. If you have big things that need to be cut, you get something much larger called loppers. But that's it. Everything else they try to sell you in those gardening catalogs is just going to be a waste of your time. Well, okay, you're going to need some gardening gloves too. Any questions so far?
Just so
Hello?
you know, I'm putting links as you mentioned them. I've been putting them in the chat. So,
Oh, that's lovely. I'm so
yeah,
glad. That's
yeah.
exactly what I was hoping you were doing. So let's go back to this. Well, you're welcome, Victoria. Okay, so let's get back to my content, which is spelled the same way as contentment, content. Let's see, since you're planting your garden, now if your homeowners association or your neighborhood or your um, local laws will allow it, maybe you want some chickens. Maybe you want to think about putting in a small chicken house or some rabbits. Rabbit pellets, their droppings, are the world's best fertilizer. They're not going to burn your plants. They're good for everything. They dissolve nicely. You can shovel them anywhere and you get a cute rabbit. I mean, some people grow them for meat. I'm too tender-hearted to do that. I might be able to kill a chicken, but not a fuzzy bunny. I'm just not up to that. I'm just not. Uh, but if you wanted to have something like that, when you're planting your garden, even if you're not going to do it until years from now, you say, that's where the rabbit hutch is going to go, or that's where I'm going to put the chickens. Just think about it when you're planning. Um, or even one of my neighbors has dwarf Nubian goats. You can hold them in with a 3-foot fence. They're so short. And she's not growing them for the milk or to make goat's milk soap or even, I mean, there are goats that have beautiful hair that you can use. Some people like it. They just like goats. The kids love to go and feed them carrots and things. There are a lot of things you can do in your neighborhood. And one of my neighbors back in New York had peacocks. We hated it. They scream. They scream ah! So loudly it'll keep you up. It was worse than having roosters. Don't recommend roosters. Chicken, yes. Roosters, no. Your neighbors will hate you. Just saying. Okay. Um, let's talk about watering next. If you are in a dry environment, and maybe you're in an area where water is restricted, I'm looking at you, California, and probably parts of Australia as well. You need to think about catching whatever rainwater comes your way. Rain barrels are something you can do. If you have leaders and gutters off your roof, you can send that to a rain barrel. From experience, I can tell you, you need to put a piece of screen, like your front or back screen doors or windows on that, so that the barrel won't get full of grit from your roof or leaves or pine needles or whatever. But it's really great. We highly recommend those. They're a nice backup if you're having a drought. Some people go so far as to get big tanks and they get the water off of their um, roof and they use it to water their gardens or just to do things other than to drink. And I suppose if you treat it, you can drink it as well. Um, Now, I showed you rain gardens and terraces, and it's again, if you're planning your garden and this is the time of year to do it, you might want to think about where the water is coming from and where it's going. I had the advantage of where I live. They had the tax maps have a topographical map, but you can also very often get this from a surveyor's map if you bought the property. And it'll tell you the elevations. And I can tell you exactly the slope and how I can look at it just by my eye and say, okay, this is downhill. Might want to put something there to catch the water. Another thing you can consider is sprinklers. A lot of people use sprinklers. If you have a lawn, you probably got sprinklers. I'm not talking about the kind that pop up through the lawn. sprinkle everything and pop back down out of sight. Don't recommend those for vegetable gardens. Um, but there are oscillating sprinklers. They go back and forth. You've probably seen them. My sister's golden retriever loved that thing. Um, and there are little ones that twirl around that are called rotary sprinklers, and they're for much smaller areas. The oscillating sprinklers can handle a big area. The biggest area can be handled by a tripod sprinkler. And if you're in an area with water restrictions, don't just buy nozzles, buy a sprinkler that has these water saving nozzles on them. They were originally engineered for Israeli kibbutzes, and they're very stingy with the water, but they do a really good job of watering everything. Another type of sprinkler is really cool. It's called a traveling sprinkler. Let me see if I can bring the picture up that because I don't know if you've ever seen a traveling sprinkler, but they are just so cute. They look like little tractors, if that makes any sense. They look like little tractors. We'll go to sprinklers and there's the traveling sprinkler. Doesn't it look like a little tractor? What it does is the water pressure makes it ratchet and move on the hose, which it uses to track. And that little plate you see here that I'm circling with my cursor is called the stop plate. And underneath it, there is a little plastic rod on a spring. And when it hits the stop plate, it pushes that up and turns the sprinkler back off automatically. We have ours, it goes around the front of the house and the side on a track. And so we can do an odd shaped area with this thing. It's made of cast iron and it's going to last you probably until the end of days. It's just, they're so well made. And I constantly buy new oscillating sprinklers because they wear out. But that tractor, that little traveling sprinkler just keeps going. Nothing seems to stop it, which is kind of cool. All right, let's go to another form of irrigation, which is drip irrigation. If you're in a desert area, this is especially useful, although in my case, I use a form of very simple drip irrigation. When I have a new tree or shrub that I'm trying to get established, I will leave the hose on it trickling and make sure that that area stays moist until it's well established. I'll also do that on fruit trees when they are fruiting. We have a fig tree in our front yard. We have 2 apple trees and 2 pears and a crab apple. And when they're starting to give me some fruit, I give them the hose, the trickle, which is a form of drip irrigation. But I'm going to show you drip irrigation is actually done with little tiny hoses, and it's under what I have in the D's for desert. Where are you? There. There it is. That's drip irrigation. Okay. And this hose here has little holes in it. And it's how gardeners in places like Arizona and New Mexico keep their plants watered. If they don't drip it directly on the plant, it's going to evaporate. So when they drip it there, the plant uses it and it uses very little water. And you can set it to really small amounts for desert landscaping. By the way, if you're living in a desert area in the United States and you have the chance, I heartily recommend the Desert Museum in Tucson, Arizona. They have a huge garden, show you the sort of things you can do in that environment. It's just an amazing place to visit. I've only worked with cactus pears. By the way, you use a little torch on it like you're making a flambe or something to get rid of all of the prickles on it, and it makes wonderful jam and jelly. Really does. They grow here. I'm in a semi-tropical area. I still am not used to the fact that I'll go drive to the store and see palm trees. I've been here 14 years and it still feels really strange to me. But let's talk about gray water next. Do you know what gray water is? Gray water is when you wash your dishes and you have some leftover water in a bin or whatever, and you take that little container outside and you throw it in the garden. It's the leftover water from washing your clothes, from washing your dishes. It's not from your toilet. But gray water is another way that if you have a small garden, you can make a significant difference in it by doing that. You just have to be really careful to use nice natural soaps. You don't want to get horrible chemicals in your food, and this would be one way to do it. So don't go green on that. The last thing I'm going to suggest is if it's feasible for you and it's something that would work for you is a well. There are three types of wells. There are electric wells, hand pump wells, and there's something called a simple pump. Now I'm going to show you a picture of our well. We have an electric well, which we had traditionally, um, we had it, there it is. We had this well. This is the wellhead here. And in case of a power outage, we also have another type of well, which is the simple pump, which doesn't necessarily mean that you need a wellhead. As a matter of fact, you don't need to drill if you have a sandy soil. You can just kind of work it in and bring the water up there. Now, there are two types of wells. There are sand wells, which are not drinking water, and there are potable wells, which are in the bedrock. Ours is touching the bedrock. It's 63 feet down, but we hit water at 22 feet. And we could put a simple pump down the wellhead if we have a power outage, which is nice. I'd also like to point out this is a timer. We're going to talk about watering here. We might as well talk about when to water. If you water in the afternoon or evening, you're going to have damp plants overnight, and they're more likely to have problems with mold diseases. The biggest one is always powdery mildew. By the way, if you get that, you can take a liter of water in a spray bottle and a teaspoon of hydrogen peroxide, and you can spray the leaves and it'll kill the mold because it's an anaerobic sort of thing. It doesn't like oxygen. That's just for fun. So anyhow, this is set for a timer. It's photovoltaic and it sets off our sprinklers. This one, this hose is for the crawler sprinkler, and this one is for the oscillating sprinkler. And it sets them off for 2 hours during the summer every single morning. We will set them up and run them again in the afternoon if it gets over 100 degrees Fahrenheit, because you know how you sweat? Plants do something called transpiration where they lose water through their pores for evaporative cooling. And if it's hot out, they're going to need more water. A quick word about how to water various things will happen later on, but I just want to emphasize this because I'm going to say it more than once. If you're growing tomatoes, which is the most popular vegetable, okay, technically it's a fruit, it's the most popular vegetable that people grow. One of the most common mistakes with growing tomatoes is that people overwater them. Tomatoes, if they get too much water, will split. So if it's already rained, that's one of the reasons ours are in buckets. We move them out of the way of the oscillating sprinkler so that they won't get too much water. So that's just something that was an FYI, but it's learned by experience. So I thought I'd pass it in there. Let's talk about what to grow and where to get it. Now, Helene, you have a picture of that seed list, or should I bring mine up?
I actually already put it in the but I do have the seed list also. I can let me see if I can share this.
This group of gardeners that I'm a part of, which I will give you the information to get to at the end, it's there are over 5,000 gardeners from all around the world, and they came up with this list. One of the things that surprised me on it was that you could go to Etsy and get seeds. Who knew? It turns out that a lot of people on Etsy are selling seeds. I got some Rouge de Hiver, red of winter, winter lettuce from a grower in France. I literally had to go to Google Translate to read the package when I got these seeds, but it was from Etsy. And Etsy really has some marvelous seeds. You want to keep that in mind, okay? One place that's on that list that I don't really like is Gurney's. I'm not Gurney's, I'm sorry. Brian dear, what's the name of that seed? Burpee, yes, thank you. Burpee has started doing, since it's so easy to take biological products and take their genome, sequence it, and then copyrighted. They've been copywriting seeds that have been in families and in the world. It's just everybody can grow this for generations, which I think is unethical. They also charge too much, and I don't think that their stuff uh, grows as well as some of the other ones. I really don't recommend burpee at all. Um, so let's try some new tastes while we're out there. Here is my seed stash. They are alphabetically in here. What can I say? I'm a little OCD about that. I tried this because I got it for free. It's called tatsoi. And it was when you get your seeds from the Baker Creek heirloom seeds, they always, if you go over a certain amount, will send you something that you might like. Well, my gosh, this is my new favorite. It tastes like the nicest lettuce you've ever had. Just absolutely love it. It gets huge, huge, like, oh, I don't know. Oh, I wouldn't say it's as big as Swiss chard, but maybe half that size. It's pretty darn big for something that's a green that I can grow during the winter if I put it inside of a cold frame. On the other hand, I tried arugula, and I really wanted to grow that because it's one of the few perennial vegetables. It's a perennial green that you can put in salads. And I tried this and I tried that and I tried different places. If it's not growing in one place, it might grow in another. Our strawberries didn't do well in the backyard. They love where they are in the front yard. It's just sometimes it's where you plant it. But I tried this everywhere. And when I finally grew it, and I swear the taste reminded me of when you were smelling a used diaper or changing a child. It was just so hideous. So try new things. You might have a new favorite like the tatsoi, and you might say, that sounds good, but not for me. And that means you're going to be moving things around. Your garden's going to be different every year, and that's okay. You can also experiment with different cultivars. For example, for years, we were trying to grow Detroit red beets. And we would get some nice beet greens we could put in salads out of it. But it just, the beets were almost non-existent. I mean, we got one that was the size of a pea, maybe a grape. This is not what you want when you're trying to grow beets. But then we went to Cylindra beets and they grew very well. And it may just be our climate. The Detroit Reds worked fine when I was up in New York, but the Cylindra beets work better where I live now. And then I'd been growing cherry bell variety of red radishes for years up in New York. And down here, they wouldn't grow at all. But when I tried the German giant radishes, the red ones, which is, by the way, if you see those big bunches of radishes in the supermarket, in a bag or maybe in a bunch, those are German giants. For years, I grew Kentucky Wonder green beans, pole beans. If you don't have a lot of space, go vertical. We have some wonderful bean trellises in the backyard. They're where they won't shade everything in the back and they give a nice screen to our windows on that side of the house. Very pretty. But Kentucky Wonder green beans, they're a string bean. You have to pull the strings. And their taste isn't the same as the ones in the supermarket. And I had thought that the Blue Lake green beans in the supermarket only came on bushes. And the bush green beans, they'll grow and then they'll die. And they're not going to just keep giving like the vine green beans. They recently came up with a Blue Lake vining cultivar. And oh my gosh, I'm in love. They taste just like the ones in the supermarket. They grow better in this climate. So again, find out what works in your area. Some of it will be because you can go to your local um, a cooperative extension and they'll say, oh, if you want to grow peaches, try these. They're resistant to the disease you get around where we live. It's called fire blight. If you want to try spinach, they'll say, okay, try these here. They will really help you with this, which is marvelous. They've already done the work and all you have to do is just ask, which is great. Uh, well, let's talk about some of the pitfalls of gardening. Let's talk about bugs. Let's talk about insects. I can't say this urgently enough. I'm not so much an organic gardener as I am a darn careful one. Bug sprays aren't just bad for humans, they kill the pollinators and the beneficial animals and insects. The best things to use, I'm going to list, but I want you above all else to consider never, ever, ever again using Roundup. Roundup kills bees. They bring it back to the hive, and that's why we have colony collapse, in my opinion. I have an apiary near me, and that we get our honey from them. She's a neighbor. We share stuff. We're fun, but Roundup is what kills their bees, and they're convinced, and I agree with them. So don't get that. Uh, on the other hand, there are things you can get. One of them is called BT, large B, small t. It's short for Bacillus thuringiensis. Bacillus thuringiensis is a bacteria, and it doesn't hurt humans at all. But if caterpillars and worms that would crawl on your plants ate it, it liquefies them from the inside. And you just mix it with some water and spray it on, and you don't have to worry about a lot of the bugs out there. Anything that's a caterpillar, you can do that with. Another thing you can do, and you have to be careful around pollinators, is diatomaceous earth. Diatomaceous earth is diatoms from, in this case, this is fresh water. You want the ones that are listed, it's food safe. These are not like the ones from the ocean, which are very jagged, and if you breathe them in, it's very bad for you. These are rounded. And nevertheless, if you put this around a plant you're trying to protect from a crawling insect, it's like they're walking on glass and they die, which is a lot easier than on the local bees. Here's another one. This is something called neem oil. Now, most of you are, believe it or not, familiar with how this tree from Southeast Asia smells, because they use it on oranges, and that smell on orange rinds is actually neem oil. It smells marvelous. It also kills just about anything out there that you're trying to get rid of with crawling and flying insects. Again, you have to be careful, but it gets rid of mites, it gets rid of fungus, which is surprising, and it gets rid of aphids. It's really a marvelous little thing to have. Last but not least is a homemade one. What I did here was I mixed up some of those cayenne peppers and some minced up and smashed some garlic cloves, and I boiled them. I strained it and I put it into a bottle with some water and let it cool. And I found that the pepper plants, the specifically the bell peppers don't like this, but nothing else seems to mind it much. And this kills a lot of insects, and it doesn't hurt any of the pollinators at all. So that's a good thing to have. All right, let's go on to the next thing. My exception, by the way, is I will use fire ant killer as needed. Fire ants, regular ants, I don't know if you knew this, but you can take cornmeal and just sprinkle it there and they will eat it. They can't digest it. They bring it down into the hive. They can't digest it and the whole hive will die. Or you can just pour boiling water from a tea kettle. But fire ants, their nests go down about 11 feet into the ground, okay? 1.5 people deep. And they bite and they sting and they're just horrid. And I have no mercy on them. I will use the fire ant killer on them. Technically, it's an insecticide, but you know, horrible problems cause for horrible measures. Let's talk about weeds. Enough about the bugs. Boy, do we have a lot of weeds. Now, there's an app that you can use to get rid of the weeds, and I think you're going to absolutely love this app. I really do. It's called Picture This, and I'm going to do a share screen to show you what it looks like. And that way you can also, Helene, get the URL for it. So let's just do that. Okay, hold on. There you go. This is Picture This. It was rated in a study at Michigan State University as being the most accurate plant identifying app. You can get it at the the App Store or Google Play, and it's really they call it a botanist in your pocket. They're not kidding. It's not as accurate on the grassy weeds as it is on the broadleaf weeds. So if you're not sure, you can go, if you're in the United States, to the USDA. They have a plant identification plan, and you can check the pictures there against what you have and be absolutely certain what you have. Well, pretty darn close to absolutely certain. So that's a really good thing to have if you're trying to deal with it, because some of the stuff that's out there that you think are weeds is actually not. Some of the stuff that's out there is edible, marvelous stuff. Once you discover which of those are, you just might want to harvest some of those weeds in your garden or lawn. We have something called broken dead nettle. It looks a lot like a nettle, which is a stinging plant, but it's not. And it's actually a superfood. And it's in the mint family. I cannot make mint grow to save my life, but this stuff takes over my lawn once a year. And I'm just going to harvest it next year because it's marvelous stuff. There's some wild onions, wild garlic, a whole bunch of things out there which other people might consider to be weeds. And you might say, you know what, I'll just plant some of that over there. That's pretty good stuff. The little plant that looks like clover but has yellow flowers on it is called oxalis. That's edible. You don't want it near your plants because it puts some chemicals out in the root to keep the other plants away. But it tastes lemony and the flowers are very sweet and it's really, really good in a salad. You should pick it and you should eat it rather than leave it in your garden, because when the seed pods for that explode, they can shoot 20 feet away, which is kind of strange. But yeah, we're dealing with heck, my day job is I'm a science fiction and fantasy editor, and this sounds like something off of a planet in outer space that would shoot seeds for 20 feet from this little tiny plant, but it does. Um, all right. The worst thing for a novice gardener to grow is squash. Okay? And this is getting back to the bugs. Squash is for the experienced gardener. Squash bugs, once they're established, absolutely nothing kills them. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. And they get in the soil. You're supposed to go underneath them and pick off the uh, the eggs. And if you don't, and they get established, and I don't know how they grow this commercially, but whatever they do, I'm buying mine rather than trying to grow it, because wow, that stuff is really hard to grow. Um, let's talk about some other problems other than weeds and bugs. Let's talk about animals. The local cat is in your garden bed and using it for a litter box. The local dog is digging holes. You have a problem with deer. You have a problem with mice. You have a problem with birds. You have a problem with squirrels. You're outside. On one hand, they deserve to eat too, but one of the things that you can do is you can plant something that they prefer. Um, there's a large insect. I mean, it's large. It's literally the size of the handle of this hand trowel. Okay, maybe that big. Maybe that big. It's called a tomato hornworm. And if you have a problem with them, and they're hard to see because they literally are the masters of disguise, and they are the piranha of the insect world. They will take all the leaves off of a tomato plant in one day, but they prefer tobacco plants. So if you can get a flowering tobacco, they will go there instead and they'll leave your tomatoes alone. Another thing that you can do, oh, wait a minute, let me tell you about my strawberries and my grapes. The grapes in the backyard, we weren't getting any. The squirrels were running off with them. So we put the grapes in the side of the front yard, and they'll eat the ones in the back. So they have their grapes and we have ours, and everybody's happy. It's also part of the reason why I moved the strawberries up front, was to keep the squirrels out of them. We get deer over the fence in our backyard too. It's rare, but we do get them. And one of the things you can do with that is you can put in plants they don't like the smell of. Marigolds being the biggest one, and I put a big batch of marigolds in front of the stuff that might tempt them, and they left it alone this year, which is great. The other thing that you can do about deer is fences. And the weird thing is, the further north you go, the bigger the deer are. Um, in India, in Texas, the deer are the size of a small dog, some of them. Not a small dog, but we're talking maybe this big. And when you get the whole way up to Canada, they will jump an 8 or 10 foot fence. But here's the thing, if there's nowhere there for them to conveniently land on the other side, even if they can jump the fence, they won't. So you put two fences, one on the inside about 3 feet, 4 feet away, so that they are worried they're going to hit that when they jump and they will leave your garden alone. You can also cover it completely with chicken wire, which will keep squirrels and, well, maybe not squirrels, depends how big they are, but it'll keep larger animals out of your garden too. Here's something that's fun. During the time when your garden is, when things are fruiting, when my strawberries are, or my blueberries are fruiting, for example, if you hang something like this up, this is just an aluminum pie pan on a string and it twists in the wind and it flashed for 2 weeks, they will not touch that food because it scares them. And then you move it and they'll scare them for 2 more weeks in a different location. So it's better than a scarecrow. It's cheaper. You can also do the same thing with wind chimes, which is even prettier. But the main thing is that they get scared by things like that, and then you won't have your food being eaten right before you were about to harvest it. All right, let's talk about some of the other pitfalls. Thinning seeds. The problem with a novice gardener is very often that, oh my gosh, something grew above the ground, and they don't realize it's so close together that nothing's going to grow beneath the ground except maybe one root. That's one of the reasons I recommend square foot gardening for the novice gardener, because they tell you how far apart to put stuff. And it's really much easier to do it that way. Some of the things that you can do about um, spacing with carrot seeds, and they're microscopic, they're like dust, they're like flour, they're so small, is you can buy something called pelletized seed where they build up some, like almost like a coating you'd have on something you would have for a pill that will dissolve. And you can just put those pellets in, or you can get a seed tape where they're embedded into a paper tape that will dissolve and will come up. But you still will have to thin those sometimes if there's more than one. I've learned that you can transplant them. So if you're really tender-hearted like I am, you can still just leave an area empty to transplant them into. But radishes, carrots, things like that, you need to keep them the distance recommended on the seed package, or you won't get anything under the ground. All right, let's talk about succession planting. You're going to plant more than one thing in a single location over time. If you're planting leaf lettuce, you're going to have to do it every 2 weeks in a different bed, and then one will get old and scraggly, and you're going to have to replant that one. Same thing with what are called green onions, pencil onions, bunching onions. Those are fun to grow because the green onions grow in a little bunch together. But when they're done, you have to pull them out and put something else in their place. Something I wish people had told me is when you take out, say, those blue leg bush beans, if you have something that's a legume, that's a bean of some sort, it will do nitrogen fixing in the roots. However, if you pull the whole plant out and throw it in your compost pile, you haven't got that nitrogen anymore. So what you can do is you can cut the plant at the soil line and plant around it. And the nitrogen that's in that root ball is going to feed the plants that you put around it. Okay. Now, also, some things take about 2 years to mature, like onions do. Onions, you can't just put in and get them that year, you get them next year. Carrots, if you want to get seeds, and parsley, it's in the same family. You have to leave the plant over the winter and it'll make seeds the next year. Let's talk about preserving what you grow. One of the first things that you can learn to do is dehydrate. These are some dehydrated bananas. No, I did not grow the bananas. They're really, really good, and they'll last a long time this way. Dehydrated food takes a lot less space than canning it or freezing it, because when it takes the moisture out, it becomes smaller. I have a dehydrator picture that I'm going to show you. There's more than one kind. There is the kind that I have, and it should be pretty easy to find it because it's, there we go. We're in the D's, shouldn't be long now. Dehydrator, that I have here has a picture of some figs that I dehydrated. I'm going to give up on it if I can't find it on the second pass. No figs? I give up. All right, fine. They're there. This is the figs. So these trays have air come up from underneath with a little fan. It gets a lid on it, and you just set it aside and you check it. And when they're crunchy, but maybe a little bit bendy for certain things like, oh, tomatoes, then you know they're ready. It's a good idea to get some cheesecloth to put underneath them so they won't stick to the trays. You can also do a solar dehydrator, and you can hang things outside in a solar dehydrator, which will fold up for when you don't need it. And just put that out there and let the sun dry it. You can make a very easy solar dehydrator. The plans are all over the internet where you just have a, just like it gets hot in your car. If you leave the windows closed during the summer, you can use that to dry food. Here, learn from my mistakes. Don't dry basil in your car. You will have the oil from the basil all over the inside of your windows, and it will be extremely hard to get out. Car will smell marvelous, though. I will say that much. But dehydrating is one way to get your food taken care of. As far as if you grow it and it's more than you can use, why not save it for having it to eat later? You can also freeze dry it. The recommended brand for freeze drying is Harvest Right. This is a more substantial investment. They start at about $3,000. You don't want to use ones because the old Harvest Right dehydrators used to have a problem with changing the oil, which needs to be done every so often. It was messy and spectacular. You want one of the new machines, but they come highly recommended, and they will dry things out that you can't dry with a dehydrator, like meat, like your leftovers. But if you see those MREs, meals ready to eat that the Army eats, or you see those emergency food kits, that's freeze dried. And you can make lasagna and put it in the freeze dryer and then reconstitute it and have it for dinner, and it'll taste like the day you made it. But again, $3,000. If you can afford it, fine. Don't forget, you also have to spend the electricity on this thing. Another thing that you can do is freezing. I'm sure all of us have done this. Used to be we were in an area that grew a lot of corn, and we had a big freezer, and we would blanch the ears. And when you blanch that, it means you have some boiling water and you dip whatever it is you're going to freeze in there, which increases the length of the time that it won't go bad in the freezer because it kills all the bacteria on the outside. And so the frozen food in the supermarket, they usually blanch it before they freeze it. You can do that too. It's easy. Um, you can also freeze berries. I'm going to be making another batch of strawberry jam from berries that I froze back in June, which is marvelous. You can get a root cellar. That's not something I can do when I've got all that hard clay underneath me. But some people have a convenient place where they can store things where it's cool and dark, and you can put potatoes and various other crops like, oh, pumpkin, squash. You have to check it every so often to see if they are going bad, and take that, cut the bad part out and use it right away. But I mean, heck, you can even my mother, when my kids were little, when we would visit, she would put all the holiday pies out in the side the in the freezing cold because there wasn't enough room in her freezer. She'd put them inside of the barbecue grill. And she'd have to lock it because otherwise we'd have visitors like raccoons and stuff eating pie. But freezing and putting things where it's cooler is just something people have done for whatever. Fermentation. A lot of the things that you can preserve involve fermentation. I make vinegar out of the peels and cores and scraps from when I take our apples, and I make apple cider vinegar. You just put an equal amount of scraps and water in a container with a couple cups of sugar, cover it with some, I use mosquito netting because otherwise you get little insects in there, little fruit flies, and let it sit for a couple of weeks, and you will end up with fruit vinegar. It can be, we do it with pears. I've seen people doing it with strawberries. It doesn't matter, peaches. You can make fruit vinegars very, very easily. You can also, of course, make wine from grapes and whatever, but that's a little more involved and requires a lot of extra Equipment, I'll talk about that in my book, and I give a really easy recipe for making dandelion wine. Please note that if you're taking dandelions out of your yard or someplace, please make sure it's somewhere they haven't sprayed for weeds or insects. You really don't want that in your food, but it looks like liquid sunshine, and it only takes a couple of weeks to ferment, so it's really a fun thing to make. Then there's also salting. If you've ever had beef jerky, or heck, I've had ostrich jerky, it was different. That's basically where they just rub the meat down with salt until it dehydrates because of the salt. And there are all kinds of videos on YouTube on how to make your own meat preserves with that or with smoking. Now, I actually have a couple of diagrams of how to do a smokehouse. Smokehouse is not hard. Smokehouse is ridiculously easy, in fact. And I'm going to give you two examples. This is a diagram of a smokehouse that you or somebody you know who's handy can build if you really want to get into this. You basically burn stuff over here, and then there's a line that goes to the underside of this, and there's the hooks for the meat. And this one has a removable bench, and this is a smokehouse shed. And this little hinge door out there is to let the extra um, smoke out. So, but it preserves the meat, and I like this simply because preserved via smoking means that it doesn't have a lot of salt. And I'm one of those people that can't eat a lot of salt. There is also, oh, wrong one. Here we go. This is a smaller setup. As long as you get a steel barrel that was used for some sort of food grade item, you can do this with a little firebox, a pipe, and this is a from barbecue grill. It's just a grill to keep the meat from falling down. And there are many plans for this over on the internet, but that's the sort of thing that you can do if you or someone you love is interested in that, which is kind of fun. All right, let's get back to the content.
So Wendy, we only have a few minutes left, so I just wanted to,
I'm just going to tell everybody that they can do water bath canning
okay.
and they can do um, pressure canning. A pressure canner is not a pressure cooker. These are made with water bath canning. They have vinegar or they have a lot of sugar. And you can get a book on that, the Ball Big Book of Canning. If you want to do vegetables or meat, you have to use a pressure canner. Okay, that was really all I was going to say. There are recipes in the book for those too. Go ahead, please.
No, thank you so much. My goodness. So I was like, my head is spinning. There's so much information. This, and I know all of this and more with a ton of links are in your book. Thank you for being here and sharing your expertise with us.
I live to make sure that people's learning curve for gardening is shortened as much as possible.
We appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.